All right, we're talking week 3 trades, guys that haven't had the best start that you can buy low on. First up, Isiah Pacheco, running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, has got off to a pretty below average start, less than 10 points in his first 2 weeks, 7.4 and 7.5 and half PPR scoring. So I think you can buy him pretty cheap right now. He's got about 50% of the snaps, and he's probably in a 1-2 punch with Jerick McKinnon, and I think he should look to get the majority of the touches on the ground. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think, will be phased out eventually, and really what it comes down to is that Isiah Pacheco really hasn't had the touchdown luck yet. I think there's a lot of upside on that Kansas City offense, and they've gotten to a bit of a slow start, especially because of Travis Kelce not being there in week 1 and then only being on about half the snaps in week 2. So once he comes back healthy, which I think he should this week, I think the offense will get moving, and eventually Pacheco should get a lot more touchdowns. There is a lot of upside in that backfield, so I'm looking to send a couple of my bench pieces to acquire Isiah Pacheco if I'm needy at running back. I think he's a decent RB2 if you have a loaded roster otherwise.
Nailed that. Completely agree. Next up, we have Jaylen Waddle, who, I mean, he's been okay. He hasn't killed you yet, but he hasn't had the Waddle-esque games. So you're probably not happy with him yet at the draft cost that you paid. He did leave last game with a concussion, so monitor that situation. But he was so close to a long touchdown. He was so close to breaking for a touchdown. And that's the thing with Waddle. He has that capability every single play, just like Tyreek Hill does. So with teams giving more and more attention to Tyreek Hill, I do think Waddle will have his fair share of games. So I personally have sent some offers for him. I'm looking to upgrade some of my receiver positions. So if you could trade some lower end guys that may be, outproducing their current draft cost, maybe Michael Pittman, who has looked excellent over the first 2 weeks. If I could upgrade from Pittman to Waddle, yep, I certainly would. So just guys around that range, that have outperformed. I would buy low on that offense. That may be one of the most explosive in the league.
Yeah, he can win you a week. I mean, like 10 points on his first 2 weeks. Obviously, there's a lot more there. And I don't worry about the schedule or anything for him because, again, Tyreek Hill's on that offense, and they're going to be able to do it regardless. A lot of concentration of targets on those two guys. You're going to have a 30-point games coming in eventually. So I want that on my team personally. So I'd be willing to pay up. I mean, again, if you got depth, I would try to send it an upgrade. All right, next up is Ja'Marr Chase. Now, look, this is not going to be easy to acquire, and it might not be possible in your league. He was drafted 2nd overall, and it's only week 3. So a lot of teams or a lot of players are not really going to want to, pardon with that high of a draft capital, and that makes sense. But I would still send some offers just because of how absolutely awful the Bengals have looked, and he has been for fantasy. So the targets are still there, 9 and 8 targets. So the volume is good. Obviously, he's still Ja'Marr Chase. He's still a super talented player. Hasn't come down with a touchdown and a pitiful 39 and 31 yards. News coming out about Burrow. He's got the calf injury and trying to use that as an excuse for his early play. I really don't think that's necessarily what it was, especially in week 1. I think it's just a slow start, and that could be part of it, just a piece of the puzzle. But there's definitely something else wrong there. I think they will get back on track eventually. If you can wait, then I would definitely try to upgrade a piece to get Ja'Marr Chase. I would I would try to upgrade AJ Brown or Chris Olave, pieces like that. If you could send them straight up or add one of your bench pieces, if a team needs a tight end or a quarterback, whatever you got on your bench that you can send to them, I would try to upgrade to Ja'Marr Chase.
Completely agree. Next up is probably our most unpopular or controversial buy low. That's going to be Alexander Mattison. Now, at the time of recording, the news just broke that they traded for Cam Akers. You can actually use that to your advantage to trade for Mattison because more and more people are going to devalue him now that they added Akers. But for me personally, I don't think Akers really does much. They needed an extra depth piece behind Mattison anyways because they only had him and Ty Chandler, and that was it. So you need a third back. I do think Akers will be involved a little bit. He'll probably take the Ty Chandler role, like that amount of touches per game. And also, if you look at Madison's, he's been super inefficient, but he's also played Tampa Bay and the Eagles, who are, 2 top 5 run defenses in the NFL with very, very talented defensive lines. He's been dealing with offensive line issues as he was missing 2 or 3 of his starters in this most recent game. And honestly, the Vikings offense is just too good to not get going. He's still involved. He's still on a good offense. The matchups are easier. I mean, they play the Chargers this week. Now, if he doesn't do good this week, that's when I might start to panic.
But that's why I'm not going to send a lot to get him, because I don't think you need to. So I'm not overpaying for him for that reason, because it is risky, right? Like, you do have another piece coming in. You do have a struggling offensive line, but the upside being there, like we've talked about, and he's seeing 5 targets a game so far in a PPR format, I still think that it's worth the risk, especially the price you have to pay right now, being so low.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not paying up for him per se. Like, I'm not going to give James Conner. I'm not going to give someone around that range. But if you could buy a little bit lower, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
Who would you think about sending, you think?
Yeah, so I would potentially, it depends on my situation, but if you could send a receiver, because running back is so thin right now, like if you could send a receiver who's been doing decent, not any of the rookies that have been doing decent, but like, an older player, maybe like a Terry McLaurin, to try to get him, I would do something like that. Running backs, I'm probably not trying to send a running back to get him, honestly, if it's a good depth piece. But if it's a player you don't want to play, I would upgrade them. But yeah, mostly probably to send a receiver to try to get running back depth, because the running back is just so thin right now.
Send like a 2-for-1, maybe like Gabe Davis and Khalil Herbert, something like that.
Oh yeah, Gabe Davis off of a big week. Yeah, definitely. To me, that's not even close. But yeah, take a look at your particular team and see what kind of pieces are in that range. Okay, next up is Javonte Williams. Now, I think Javonte Williams should get a lot more snaps going forward. We knew that, just a year off of the injury, he would make a slow start. He's got 45% of the snaps in both of the first 2 games, but he's looked pretty good, and he's been involved in both the running and the passing game, which is good to see. Obviously, he's not the only running back there, but he's the obvious one, especially as the season goes on. He showed in his first year that he's super talented, and I think he'll get back to that eventually. Their team isn't great, so I don't think they're going to be in a lot of game scripts that are favoring the run, but his involvement in the passing game is a little bit, it helps that a little bit, with 6 and 3 targets. I do like that. And his start to the year, not having a touchdown yet, which is one of the things we look for, right? It's only 2 weeks into the season. So a lot of the things we're looking at here is workload. Like, how much workload are they getting? Also, just how good they look on the field, and what do we expect going forward. Only 2 weeks into the season is not a high enough sample size to say if they're going to get touchdowns. So players that have got a lot of touchdowns so far, it's just unsustainable, and so you could sell high on those guys. But on the other side of that coin, if you haven't just gotten the end zone yet, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Javonte Williams is obviously going to get goal line work for Denver, even if it's a struggling offense, and there's obviously going to be a lot more touchdowns to come his way. So despite the fact he's got less than 10 points in each of his first 2 games, not only should his workload increase, but I think his luck with the touchdowns should increase as well.
Yep, absolutely. All right, next up we have Josh Jacobs. And this one might be a little scary or a little off-putting, because he has looked absolutely terrible. He has negative 8 yards before contact, which is not good. Mm-hmm. But it's been 2 games. He missed all of training camp, all of preseason. So week 1 was probably him getting back into game shape, trying to get into his groove. Week 2, the offense just didn't look good. They got absolutely throttled by just a better, more dominant Bills team. Devontae Adams went out with a concussion. Jacoby Myers wasn't there. So really, the defense had to only focus on Josh Jacobs, which is unfortunate, but that's where we are. He does still provide you value in PPR leagues, as he had 5 for 51 in this past game, which is excellent for a PPR back. So for me, I'm looking to, maybe 2-for-1 my way up to him. Maybe if you can 1-for-1 him. So I would offer pieces like James Conner plus a bench piece receiver or something. Maybe you probably can't do this, but if somebody likes Miles Sanders and then a better receiver, not necessarily a bench receiver, but maybe your wide receiver 3 or 4.
Some running backs that have had big games, DeAndre Swift, I would be willing to package him up to get Josh Jacobs, and Brian Robinson, same thing. They both had really good games, and they are kind of like hype players right now. You could probably send a player I'm actually interested in sending right now is Alvin Kamara. So Alvin Kamara, I know it sucks that you held him, but that increases his value, right? That he's only 1 week away from playing. So you might have to wait a week, but if a team is like 2-0 or something and they're not worried about missing that 1 week, then I think you could package him with somebody to move up. I don't really think Alvin Kamara is going to be as, he's not going to have as many snaps as people really think of Alvin Kamara as having, right? Like he's not. I think it's going to be a 1-2 thing, probably with Kendre Miller in that offense, and I just don't know if he has the same kind of upside that Josh Jacobs has at this part of their careers.
Yep, I agree. And look, it's not going to feel good because Josh Jacobs hasn't looked good, but when you get a player of his talent that he showed us last year and his upside, I mean, I would definitely be willing to send lower RB2s or, a low end RB1 packaged with a bench player or something. Just, I mean, you're not going to win fantasy leagues by playing it safe. You have to take risks on the high upside players and hope that they pay off in order to win a championship.
Yep, and he's still an elite talent. So, -2 yards, though. Show him what he got last week, -2, and that probably drives down his price a good bit, I'd say. All right, next up, I just want to kind of mention these two players, which is Calvin Ridley and Travis Etienne. They might not be, for sale. You might not be able to get them because they had really good week ones. It just kind of depends on the player who has them in your league. Like, how do they value week 1 versus week 2? Because they both had big week 1s and then disappointed in week 2. But what we saw in week 1 is legit for both of them, especially to me, Calvin Ridley. Like, Calvin Ridley's a locked-in wide receiver 1 at this point. So if they have any hesitation about what happened in week 2, if you didn't watch the game, he dropped I think a couple of touchdowns that would have changed his week completely. Although, yes, it was a disappointment, but they really just couldn't seem to get it moving against Kansas City. And it was a low-scoring game in general. I think it's going to be a bounce back for the Jags in general. So that bodes well for both Ridley and Etienne. And Tank Bigsby is they're phasing him in super slow. And I think Etienne still has, he's for this whole year. I think he'll still be their guy. So I'd buy low after a bad week 2 if you can.
Yep, absolutely. Like, for example, I sent Mike Williams and Khalil Herbert as an offer for Calvin Ridley. Owner hasn't responded yet, so I don't know. But I feel like that's a pretty strong offer that you could make, upgrading from Mike Williams and a bench piece to Calvin Ridley's
or
upside
Puka
per week.
How about Puka?
I would do Puka straight up for Ridley.
Or I would add in somebody on your bench too. Like, who else has done well? Keenan Allen. What would you do in that situation? I know you like Keenan Allen. To be fair, let's make this fair.
Would I trade Keenan?
Yeah, would you trade Keenan straight up to get Ridley?
No, I'm keeping Keenan.
I'll take Ridley there. So you make your decision. But I think that's close.
To me, the quarterback's better for Keenan. The offense as a whole is better. And he sees more consistent targets.
All right,
so
Devontae Smith.
A proven track record.
Devontae Smith for Calvin Ridley. I would do that.
Yeah, I probably would because Calvin Ridley's probably going to have more pass volume in his offense, and he is the bona fide number 1.
Yeah.
I know that's weird to say after Christian Kirk just had an excellent game, but don't get it twisted. Calvin Ridley is the number 1 for this team. So I would probably take Ridley in that scenario. And I feel like that's a trade you could get done. If you sent Devontae Smith straight up for Ridley right now, you're probably getting that done.
Could, yeah, definitely could.
Based on this past 2 weeks. All right, so our last one, this is going to be a super, super buy low and maybe even a pickup off the waiver. But if Joshua Kelley is available on the waiver or some manager has him that they're not happy with, get him on your team. I know he had a chance last week and disappointed, but that's against the Titans, who have one of, if not the best run defense in the league, and a very, very poor pass defense, which is exactly the game plan the Chargers used. They attacked them through the air, which is why Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both had good games, and, left the run game to pretty much do its thing. They gave him, 10, 12 carries, and it didn't look very good, but that's because the run defense is that good. This week, he plays the Vikings, who, if you know, just gave DeAndre Swift 175 rushing yards. So, I think Austin Eckler is going to be out again this week. The reports are not sounding positive. He himself isn't sounding positive on his podcast. He's never going to come out and say, I'm not playing this early in the week because, you can't lose that competitive advantage. But It does not sound good, and he's not practicing already. They said his timetable is undetermined, which to me sounds a little scary. They do have a week 5 bye, so who knows if they hold him out to that bye to give him the full month to recover from this ankle injury. If that's the case and you get another 2 to 3 games of Joshua Kelley, you're going to be very happy with that, I do believe, because he gets the Vikings and the Raiders the next 2 weeks, which are two of the best matchups you could hope for your running back. And Kellen Moore's offense uses the running back a lot. So I think if you are desperate, that is definitely someone you can go for.
Yeah, I think this is like send literally the lowest players on your bench, like 1 or 2 of them for Kelley at this point. Or, again, just wait and see if he's dropped. Like, go check your waivers. He could be available right now. But, yeah, I don't think it's prescriptive what we saw against the Titans. We already know what they've done so far this year and a little bit of what we saw last year. So I think better days are ahead as far as Joshua Kelley, especially, again, if Eckler misses time. All right. I think that wraps it up for our trade targets. If you guys enjoyed the content, consider subscribing. Help out the channel. Only 3% of you guys are subscribed, so we'd super appreciate it. Anyways, we've been the Fantasy Bros, and we're out.